right, how we doing there, Vincent?
I'm pretty keen for this space to get rocking and rolling.
Mate, I just hit reset on the phone. I've come in fresh. I've closed everything down. I've locked it all down, and so yeah, I'm literally you handle the invites. I'm not even going to touch anything, and yeah, let's get this party started. I see Stoic.xmr has turned up. Awesome. Everything is going perfectly and smoothly. Great to have you here, Stoic XMR. How's things, brother? Oh, he's dropped out. He's dropped out. I spoke too soon. I put the mockers on us.
Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely, bro.
How are we, guys?
Doing well, doing well. Hey, before we get started, Vince, I've had feedback that when you don't mute off, there's an echo for everybody. So from that last space, so just that's when you're not talking, just mute off. We're just going to wait for a few people to roll in here, Stoic, just so we get the absolute most value out of the time that you're giving us today. But how's things, bro?
Yeah, good. Nice and busy as always. Appreciate you guys having me here.
Hey, cool. Just while we're waiting for community members and people to bowl in, do you mind just sharing with us, just for people who come in later and listen to the recording, I guess who you are, where you come from, and I guess the backstory to your journey within the crypto space?
The old anti-privacy 101, if you will. So, yeah, I suppose I'd never really know how to answer this question. The old tell me a bit about yourself question, because I don't think I'm particularly interesting as a person. But I suppose you guys can probably tell by my accent I'm Australian. I was born in Melbourne. I now live near enough to the Gold Coast that I call it the Gold Coast. I think my sort of crypto story kind of started around 2015 when a friend introduced me to Bitcoin. And pretty much, like when you discover anything, let's just say there's a new bloody latest greatest thing tomorrow. You generally don't just drop everything you're doing in life and obviously run towards that, or just start working in the industry, blah, 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 right? So I was working at Dan Murphy's at the time. So for those who don't know, Dan Murphy's is just like a alcohol supermarket. So I continued working there and doing my thing, had my own goals, wanting to open a business. Then it wasn't until 2018 that I actually started working within the crypto industry. So I worked for a cryptocurrency miner, just selling investment packages, basically. So I did that for quite a bit. So that role I did for around 18 months, and then I moved into the social media department of the company and worked there for around about a year, 15 months, something like that. And that was until May 2021. So obviously, you guys who were here remember what happened in May 2021. That's basically when the entire bull market popped. So I kind of left at an inopportune time, because obviously a lot less people would have been employing at the time. Although even compared to now, there still were a lot of people employing. But I basically moved to a shitcoin company, a decentralized cloud storage company. Worked there for a little bit. What did I do after that? And then I basically left there, moved to another shitcoin cold storage company. And then I left there after I did that part-time for around about, it's really hard to say. Maybe you could classify it 6 months, you could classify it 3 months. It really depends. Like I might have done a bit of work in the first 3 months and then done like one bit of work for the next 3 months kind of thing. So they want to classify it. But basically where I ended up landing is because which is where I am now. And I don't really share this with too many people, but it's kind of become a bit more public knowledge. And also don't really care either, because it's, I suppose, something to be proud of. I had a friend who was working for Mark Moss, a Bitcoin YouTuber, for some of you guys who don't know. He was working there as a researcher, and about 6 months after he started working there, a role came up as just like at the time it was just making reels. So YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, same sort of content, like that mobile phone. full, ADHD. I call it social media fentanyl. So I was just making those for, that's basically how I got my job with Mark. Then over the course of the last year and a half that I've been working there, I've basically, well, it's hard to say. I've obviously gone more or less full time, but obviously I'm not making reels anymore. It's more or less just a producing role. That's kind of my crypto story, but how I actually found, since this space is about privacy, is what it's called. I'm obviously a big privacy advocate. I'm a big Monero advocate. It's actually kind of a funny one, and I think the ethos of how I found Monero actually goes back to how I actually found Bitcoin, which was kind of like a real cypherpunk kind of venture back in the day. I mean, back in 2015, people didn't even know what Bitcoin was, right? I mean, it was just some thing that existed within the cypherpunk community. Anyone who knew things about it would really, one, not know much, and two, maybe just know that the price, the volatility of the price was, quite significant. So people really didn't know much about it. It's kind of like this hidden cypherpunk thing, which is the idea that I actually really fell in love with, to be honest with you, because it was a whole tool that allowed you to operate outside of the state and really gave power back to the individual. Although I didn't actually realize it to the full extent at the time. So you guys could probably figure out, without saying it directly, you guys could probably figure out what I was using Bitcoin for back in the day. And it wasn't until, it would have been roughly 2020, so like a good 4.5, 5 years after I discovered Bitcoin, and a good few years after I've been working in crypto, that I actually discovered Monero. Like, I'd heard about Monero, basically day two that I was in crypto. So in 2015, you look at, it was CoinMarketCap back then. I mean, Monero was, I can't remember exactly what number it was, but it was definitely up there. It was around, as in, it was definitely top 10. So it was well known. I knew about it. Didn't know much about it. Didn't really think much about it. Because again, like I say, you don't just drop everything in your life. And to be frank with you, I didn't really understand the concept of decentralized money and the power that actually gave to people. It was just the idea of like that cypherpunk tool that I really fell in love with. But I didn't go down the so-called money rabbit hole, or whatever you want to call it, right? The big, deep rabbit hole. So it wasn't until 2020 that I really discovered I sent a transaction on Monero. And for some reason, it wasn't showing up, within whatever time limit it said it would show up, even though it was allegedly confirmed. We should have been confirmed. So, with Bitcoin, coming from a Bitcoin background, I went on the, block scanner. I had a look, put in the transaction ID, and obviously nothing came up. And there was a real sort of light bulb moment in all of that, where Bitcoin over the course of 2015 to up until that time had become a lot more well known. There had become a lot more police attention to it. There has been and still is chain analytics companies who are able to trace Bitcoin and basically get people thrown in jail and use it to prosecute crimes and all these kind of things. And I'm not quite sure exactly what it was, but there was a massive light bulb moment for me when I saw that you couldn't trace the transactions on Monero. I thought this was really the whole point of Bitcoin, if you will. If you forget like this, I was a Bitcoin maximalist at the time. Like, forget this whole culture of Bitcoin is the outcome. When you look at freedom as the outcome, which is really what it was designed for, Bitcoin as well, then this was the tool. Like I said, there was just a real light bulb moment where this was the tool that Bitcoin was actually supposed to be. So it was really going down that rabbit hole, obviously learning as much as I could about Monero, especially from a Bitcoin maximalist lens, because I think the Bitcoin maximalists actually have a really good lens to look at things. At least a way of learning about things and understanding things. So yeah, I kept learning about it. And it wasn't until, so for those who are not aware, I've literally just written a book called The Monero Standard, which is a bit of a play on the Bitcoin Standard. And when I say it's a play on the Bitcoin Standard, I mean the name is a play on the Bitcoin Standard, not the content itself. So it probably wasn't until a little bit later that I actually started writing the Bitcoin Standard, and there was a real second light bulb moment for me where I watched a podcast which was Monero Talk, Doug Tooman's podcast, Monero Talk, and he did an episode with Mono Crypto. And I'm not going to go through what they spoke about during the interview. I think it's fantastic. They generally speak about globalism, privacy, technocracy, all these kind of things. And it kind of put a different lens on it for me. So there was those two light bulb moments. One when I first sent a transaction, and second was this episode with Mono Crypto. And it was probably within a month after that that I kind of decided that I actually had something really worth sharing with the world. And also, I was going through knee surgery at the time. I had my third knee reconstruction. And so, obviously, anyone who's had a knee reconstruction, and I'm sure many surgeries are similar, there's a lot of pain involved. So they give you, what is it? What are they called? They're opium-based painkillers, basically. So I was feeling absolutely fantastic about life in the hospital ward. I decided that that was enough for me to start writing a book. So anyway, I started writing the book. And, you know, it really wasn't a moment of, so it wasn't just a moment of inspiration. Obviously when the painkillers wore off and the knee surgeries, well past, I still genuinely believe to this day, and did back then, that there was something worth sharing. So I kept writing it. And obviously, I actually thought at first, how hard can this be, right? I mean, all it is you write a book and you print it, you stick it here in Australia, some of you guys sound Aussie, you stick it in a Australia Post envelope and you send it, right? Like, it's not that hard. Boy, I'm glad. I'm probably not glad I was wrong about that, but I'm glad I didn't actually take too much of a deeper look into it, because it's a lot harder than that. And if I knew how hard it was, to be honest, I probably still would have written it. But it would have probably given me a different lens on it, nevertheless. So, I mean, that's probably, I've ranted for about probably 15 minutes right now, which is even impressive by my standards. So if you guys have any follow-up questions, or there's anything specific you want to know, or just put me back on track, just say so.
No, that was great, bro. Good to get it's really good to get context into your history and into your, I guess, your career and what you've been doing. And we like to, I mean, as we bowl in, we like to go deep and sort of, figure out what's been your backstory. But I find this very interesting that you called it shitcoin cold storage facilities. Could you tell me a little bit more about what that entailed?
So the first company I worked for was called Aurora FS, which was a pre-ICO cold storage shitcoin company. The reason I left is because I knew within myself, I would say to one of my colleagues who I'm still friends with to this day, this project is going absolutely nowhere. And not is it only going nowhere, nobody's focusing on any value, providing any value. All they're really focusing on is basically how much money they can make. That was really the only factor in deciding anything. And another reason was it was a Chinese project. So for you guys who are not familiar with Chinese culture, and I thought I was sort of at the time, I definitely wouldn't have called myself an expert, but I'm certainly familiar with the culture, so to say. But I wasn't familiar with the aspect that age in China is generally hierarchy. So the older you are, the more hierarchy you have. And well, the higher up the hierarchy you are. And considering I was the youngest by far, nobody listened to anything I had to say, which was, one, obviously frustrating, but two, considering I was, and this is not an overstatement, this is not arrogance at all, it's quite literally just fact. I was the only person in the whole place who knew the first thing about crypto. Nobody else knew anything. They were either lawyers or secretaries or come from education backgrounds and all these kind of things. So I was the only one who knew anything about crypto, and I was pretty much the only one who wasn't getting listened to about anything. And that, in hindsight, that might have also been because I was focusing on providing value to people rather than how much money we can make. So that project obviously went to shit, exactly as I predicted. And yeah, so that's just a quick, brief sum up anyway.
Hey, cool. I think I do have a bunch of questions, and it's cool to see people rolling in because, yeah, I think people who are listening in are going to get a huge amount of value out of this. But I'll ping it to you, Vince, if you have any questions. And yeah, I'm sort of lining up a bunch of questions here about specifically about Monero and privacy coins, but was very keen to just hear your backstory. And it's pretty cool, man. It's pretty cool what you're doing. Obviously, you've got a range of different experiences, and now you're working for. You were saying I didn't catch his second name perfectly. Was it Mark Moss or Muss?
Mark Moss. So some of you guys might be familiar with him. He's a Bitcoin YouTuber. He's got about 500,000 subs on YouTube.
Cool. Yeah, that and maybe yeah, I've got a couple of questions about that. But Vince, if you've got something, I'll swing it to you, mate.
Yeah, no real question, I guess, except the burning one that I have in the back of my mind, because I do know a friend of a friend who does mine Monero and has been doing it for quite a while and has kind of stayed on that path. Um, but how does Monero then really achieve the privacy then? Obviously you were saying that you couldn't track the transaction like we can on Ethereum and most other blockchains, but how does it actually really achieve then that privacy? Are there other avenues that people could possibly track the transactions, or how does it actually go about achieving that?
Yeah, so probably the one, well, when you look at a Monero transaction, there's really only a few things, or when you look at any transaction, there's really only a few things that need to be um, obfuscated. Things like the amount, things like the sender and receiver, etc. So there's only a few pieces of data that need to be obfuscated. So for the sender and the receiver, they use something called ring signatures. So I suppose for the sender, they use something called ring signatures. So when you say, for example, on a Bitcoin transaction, you send a transaction, you publish your address to the chain, essentially. Um, with ring signatures, you still technically publish your address to the chain, but you're doing it in what's called a ring, right? Hence ring signatures. So currently the ring size is 16. So there's your address plus 15 other addresses. So for any person who goes and looks at the chain, goes and looks at the ring, it could be 1 out of 16, which probabilistically is that they're all the same. So if anyone was to make any enforcement over any of that, they really can't prove any of it. Um, Compare that to Zcash's, and I just want to preface, I'm not a cryptographer. I'm actually a cryptography dumbass, but I do understand the concepts. If you compare that to Zcash, the privacy on Zcash is technically more perfect than it is on Monero, because the whole concept of, and I know Monero uses zero knowledge proofs, but the whole concept of zero knowledge proofs, hence the word Zcash, is how do you prove something without actually revealing what it is, right? So the example that I learned from is, how do you prove that I have a how do I prove to you that I have a key for the house without showing you the key for the house, right? Well, one example of that is you could see me in the house. Now, obviously, there's nuance to that example, but you could smash a window, whatever. But that's the whole sort of concept. How do you prove something without proving it? So Zcash doesn't actually reveal the sender's address, so to say. They just reveal like a cryptographic derivative, from my understanding. But on the counter side of that, I believe there's a proposal. There's certainly an effort going on in the Monero community at the moment to introduce something called full chain memberships, which is something being worked on by a guy called Luke Parker. And it's pretty much the same concept as ring signatures, except you add every address on the chain into that ring signature. So let's just say there's 1 million addresses on the chain. You publish all 1 million addresses, right? So obviously it could literally be anyone, which is the exact same result at the end of the day. The other thing you sort of have to think about is So I'm just reading parts of the Monero standard here. So there's different techniques they use to hide amounts. I believe it is off the top of my head without reading. I believe that's ring CT, although there's may even be people screaming in the audience, this guy's an idiot, blah, blah, blah. And as I said at the start, you would actually be right about that, regardless of what I said about this. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things too, but that's generally speaking how you preserve the privacy on Monero.
Very, very cool. No, this is great, man. I'm taking some notes here and busy tip-tapping away, searching things on ChatGPT concurrently. Just to let everybody know, if other people in the space do want to come up and ask questions or have any sort of contribution, happy to have you up as well. So just ping through a request. So just to, I mean, we're an investor group, and we're involved in crypto mining. So we have our own mining farm, which is, through fractionalized NFT. So this is of particular interest to us because of, the fact that Monero is proof of work technology. What is the current status of Monero proof of work mining? Is that is there a lot of hash rate being applied to that? Is it busy? What's going on with Monero with that regard?
It's a pretty good question. I have to look up exactly what the hash rate is. One thing that's you have to definitely so you hear, maybe you don't hear, but I certainly hear Bitcoin maxis talking about, the hash rate on Monero is so low compared to Bitcoin, right? But it's really it's literally comparing apples and oranges. It's actually one of the dumbest things you could possibly say, because they have two completely different hashing algorithms. So even if you go on your computer right now and you try and produce, it doesn't matter what computer you have, you try and produce a SHA-256 hash, you'll produce whatever the amount is. It doesn't actually matter. Say 10,000, 100,000, it doesn't actually matter. And then you change mining algorithms. Obviously, you change networks to Monero, which uses RandomX algorithm. You'll produce significantly less. So when you see the Bitcoin, and that's it doesn't actually matter, because they're just apples and oranges. So even if it was more, it still wouldn't make it necessarily more decentralized or secure, because it's always relative. Yeah, sorry, I was on a rant there. Well, where were we going with that one?
No, I just thought I'd do a little bit of hunting around as you were talking. We're talking about Monero hash rate. So currently it's 2.24 gigahertz. The all-time high. The all-time high was 3.71. So it's down maybe like 40%, which isn't crazy an amount down, considering. And then having a look at the charts, you can basically see it's kind of been a steady incline. It really popped off pre-2020, late 29, and then it really climbed up around that. In pre-2020, it was like 285 megahertz, and it's pumped right up as high as, that 3.7, but it's sitting fairly stable between, like 2 to 3 gigahertz. So yeah, there's definitely like hash rate being applied there, which is, fairly interesting. But Ghost, hopefully I'm saying your name right. Yeah, you've got a question or some contributions to make?
Yeah, I've enjoyed the space so far, and I think Stoic is got a lot of great information. That's why I wanted to pick his brain a little bit. Can you explain, Stoic, how you see dynamic block sizing work with regards to scalability of Monero, and the idea whether it's enough or not, and that at some point Monero might need a layer two? If you sort of, if you can explain a little bit of your thought process, and that'd be great.
Yeah, sure, man. It's actually a really good question. Dynamic block size is something that not many people know much about, because you generally have in the rest of the crypto space just a price-based, I suppose a demand-based system on whether you're going to be included in the block or not. So obviously with Bitcoin and Ethereum, one of the listeners we have in the audience right now, Darren, I use his analogy for how Darren Rogan, how he explains this. So if you have, you know, a train, right? And you're essentially selling tickets to the highest bidder. So if you're willing to pay more than the next guy, you'll get a ticket and you'll get on the train, i.e. you'll get into the block for it, right? Now, Monero is a little bit different for this one. So the whole concept of Monero is that it's not like that stagnant size. It is that you're actually able to increase and decrease the block size as there's more demand or less demand for it. And the benefit of this is obviously fees don't get driven up. And when you're talking about the whole purpose of Monero, which is to be a digital cash, right? That's the whole point. It has to be functional. It has to work. And obviously, one of the key criteria for that is to have low fees. Otherwise, it happens like we have on Bitcoin right now, where fees go up to, well, we've seen them go up to just incredible amounts, frankly. But I don't know what they are today. So I'll preface that. But we've seen recently fees going up to $10. And in the past, we've seen it go significantly higher. So with Monero, I think the highest fee I've ever paid is around about 3 cents or something like that. And that was actually ridiculously high, I may actually add. Usually it's, you know, a fraction of a cent. So that's more or less how dynamic block sizes work. The only thing that limits that is, so it's obviously a choice, right? The miner gets to choose whether they get to increase the block or not. And the trade-off for them increasing the block is that there's no block reward. So the fees that they accrue from the extra transactions have to, if you're talking from an economic point of view, have to outweigh, you know, what they would lose in the block reward. So that's around about, what is that? It's about 0.6 Monero, I think it is. I think there's a tail emission of 0.6 Monero for the rest of ever. So yeah, that's just one thing to consider. But it's that whole mentality of having a workable digital cash system, so we can keep low fees for everyone and obviously include everyone in a block, you know, and obviously get transactions processed quickly, etc.
Then what are your views then, since the topic is privacy coin, when you talk about potential competitive sort of networks like Mimblewimble or Grins at first, the first iteration Mimblewimble, or even Litecoin's extension Mimblewimble extension block coming into effect. What are your thoughts about that and how that could play out as far as competition when digital private money comes in play?
Yeah, I just want to preface what I'm going to answer with is that I don't consider myself a Monero maximalist. I don't actually think Monero is the outcome. Like a lot of Bitcoin maximalists think Bitcoin is the outcome, it's the goal, right? I actually don't really care if Monero is the outcome. The most important thing and the only reason I advocate for Monero is for freedom, right? So as it stands, I believe Monero is the best tool we have for freedom. I also don't know much about Grin. I know that Grin has, well, I know it's not used. If I look now, Grin market cap, I'm sure the market cap of Grin is around about 10 million or something like that. So there's basically nobody using it. I think an important thing to distinguish Monero from Mimblewimble, sorry, it's the fully diluted market cap of Grin is under $5 million. So nobody's using it. So as I was saying about Mimblewimble, same is true with Zcash, is that when you actually think about the concept of privacy, there's really a lot I could say about it, but a lot of it comes back to hiding in the crowd, if you will. Because if you're using, say, for example, Mimblewimble, or you're using, let's just put the information out there that Zcash, while the privacy technology is more perfect, it's more cryptographically perfect than Monero, it's actually optionally private. So it's transparent by default and you have to opt into privacy. So what that means for both Mimblewimble and Zcash is you have, you know, generally speaking, most of it is, you know, transparent transactions. And then you have the people who are opting in to privacy. Now that really puts you in a situation where the people who opt into privacy stand out like bird shit on a black shoe. And it goes to the sort of theory that people who are choosing to be private are actually doing something wrong. So then they're obviously more likely to be.
Awesome. I do. So, can we get into? I've just been googling a few things here on ChatGPT, which is really interesting around. You're talking just then about the scalable blocks, and sort of what I'm reading here is that the system looks at the median size of the last 100 blocks and allows the next block to be a certain percentage larger than this median. It's actually crazy to think how good the developers must have been when they created this technology. It's quite impressive. Just really getting an understanding, but so with the privacy itself, could you tell us, I guess, in more of a layman's terms, on a day-to-day, like, say, for example, let's just give an example. One of our community members, they've received their Bitcoin payout. We've paid out to them, and they're now wanting to move a token over into a privacy coin, essentially to for whatever reason they choose to maintain their privacy. What is the actual, I guess, the best process for that, if any, or what are the processes? Is it just through a normal means, through an exchange, or is there like specific wallets that we need to be having? So the actual, I guess, the actual details of the day-to-day use of Monero and privacy coins.
Yeah, sorry, it's just fully cut out. I'm not even sure if you got my answer on the last question. But are you guys asking about, so I had to leave and come back. Are you guys asking about how to obtain Monero?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, the actual practical use of it. I know we've been talking conceptually about the technology and whatnot, but yeah, like day-to-day use, or if people are looking to, flip their Bitcoin or what have you, or their different tokens over to Monero, what's the best way to maintain your privacy and also to maintain good security?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's important to note that whenever you go through a centralized service, obviously there's going to be a degree of not being completely private. But obviously the best way you can do that is through non-KYC exchanges, right? To give you an example of some, so one I like is called MEXC, obviously a massive crypto exchange. Most of you guys probably know it. There's also another app that I tell people to use, which is called Trocador or Trocador, depending on how you pronounce it, where you're from. So it's Trocador. And they have a web app. So trocador.app, you just type into your web browser, that'll come up. And that's just an what we call an aggregator of exchanges. So they'll give you the price, the spread, the fees, the KYC requirements, and you can choose. So you can obviously choose to do KYC if you like, or you can choose to do non-KYC. And in my experience, it generally costs more to do KYC. So I'm not really sure why people would choose those, but the option's there nevertheless, right? So those are the two sort of avenues I'd choose to use it if you had to. But like I say, there's always going to be a degree when you're going through centralized providers. There's always going to be a degree of data storage and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, those are the two best.
Okay, cool. And from a security perspective, has there been, I guess, any major compromises or security issues with Monero or other privacy coins? And is there certain specific, I guess, precautions that people need to take when using Monero?
Yeah, so great question. The short answer is yes. To add an asterisk to that, it's incredibly nuanced. To add a second point to that, I am definitely not the best person to be asking about that. That's definitely more of a cryptography question. There is a series on YouTube called Breaking Monero, which is done by the Monero Community Work Group. If any of you guys are familiar with a person called Justin Ehrenhofer, Justin is the person who really did all those ones. But he talks about all these different types of attacks you can do on Monero. One that I know, for example, I think it's called like a Alice Bob Alice attack. So it's where you send basically what you send to an address and they send back. There is some sort of data that's revealed in that. There also is a reason why there's 20-minute spend, what's it called, like a spending lock. on each wallet. Obviously, you can make sub addresses to negate this problem. So there's a lot of nuance to all of what I'm talking about. But basically, and you can't do it anyway, but the whole theory is that if you could do it, say you send a transaction now and then you send a transaction again right now in 2 minutes, the next block. Probabilistically, remember we're talking about having the ring signatures in a block, so 1 out of 16. Probabilistically, you turning up 2 blocks in a row is pretty low. Like if you talk about if it's all random, it's pretty low. So it gives you a good indication that at least one of those transactions is being spent by the address that turns up twice. There is, yeah, I would refer all of you guys to the Breaking Monero series because there is a whole bunch of different attacks. I'm kind of just trying to jog my memory. But yeah, again, I really don't think I'm the best person to answer that because I'm not a cryptographer. And if anyone in the audience is a cryptographer, especially if you're a cryptographer knowing about Monero, I'm sure you're absolutely yelling at me right now. And that would be more than fair.
Nah, all good, bro. I mean, at least you're, you're saying it that it's not your wheelhouse, and that's cool. I guess we'll just keep digging. But sorry, I do have a bunch of other questions, but I'll swing it to Vince. If you do have any questions, or Ghost, I know I've been asking a lot here, so I'll swing it back to you guys.
Yeah, I'm actually, Mark. I think this leads to even another discussion as digital assets become more popular, more mainstream. I guess Stoic. What do you see the usage of Monero being as more people come into this digital asset area, and in seeking to have some of this retained privacy in their transactions, and is Monero uh, in a position to deal with that kind of volume if as things start to progress and we move towards this digital asset arena with regulation coming in and things like that? And the that's I guess that's my big question is what do you see the future of Monero looking like with this?
That is a very broad question from like a technical point of view. Obviously, Monero has the dynamic block size that Ghost asked about earlier. So from a technical point of view, it has the scalability to deal with large amounts of transactions and new users, etc. Right? From I suppose a social point of view, that is really, I suppose, more of the unknown. I mean, obviously, no one can predict the future anyway. But that's probably more of an unknown because, regulation, as some of the people in the crowd know, much to my despise, is coming. But the great thing about truly decentralized protocols, and I would put Bitcoin in this, and I would put some other mainly proof of work based protocols in there too, is that decentralization it's not affected by regulations, right? So it doesn't matter if somebody says X is illegal or you have to do X, Y, Z in order to jump through a hoop. It doesn't actually matter if you have like a decentralized permissionless network. So, and I think Monero is a very strong tool for that. I think Bitcoin, I think Litecoin, I think Dogecoin, I think currently Zcash is a good example of that. Although there have been talks about Zcash moving to proof of stake. So I kind of separate that to, at least without going into incredible nuance, putting that just to proof of work coins. Yeah, I mean, I really think that just saying this is going to happen or that's going to happen is really all speculation. I do think we can kind of look at the driving forces. So for what's going to drive people to Monero or obviously away from Monero. And I think the driving factors, as I talk about in the Monero standard, are really the fiat Ponzi. So people need a safe haven outside the dollar system, in short. And this whole sort of global socialist technocratic agenda that we have going on. And they're really making a push towards digital IDs, social credit scores. That can also be a carbon credit score, for example. So digital IDs, social credit scores. There's a lot of socialist agendas that are really, the whole aim of it is to restrict freedom. So I don't know if that's the aim of it. I think the aim of it is to make the world a better place from a socialist point of view. but they do that by restricting freedom. So those are really the driving forces that are going to push people to Monero. That could be something like banning meat. And we see, the World Economic Forum talking about the old famous quote, "Eat the bugs," right? And banning meat. So people are really going to be looking for options. And when you look at the problems, say with Bitcoin, right? Like we see, I mean, pretty much every day that people are getting busted for using Bitcoin on the darknet for some reason or another. Usually they're going after the big fish. Sure, I get it. Like they go after the vendors or whatever, or the marketplaces themselves. But the whole concept is that if they want to shut somebody down with Bitcoin, it's really almost too easy, especially with KYC, and obviously the traceability of transactions. So sort of trying to fix the problems that we have with Bitcoin, privacy is needed. So to fix the whole global socialist agenda, to give power back to the people, privacy is needed. To fix the problems that people have with the fiat Ponzi, proof of work is needed. And these are the two main concepts I actually talk about in the Monero standard: is proof of work and privacy, as solutions for the two biggest problems that we see in society today. So we can only speculate what's going to happen. We can't even really guess what's going to happen, because the old saying goes, predictable events play out in completely unpredictable ways. And that's exactly what we're going to see. That's what we've seen throughout all history. And that's what we're going to continue to see. We don't know what tricks they have in their, in their bag or their hat, so to say. So we're going to see how that plays out. But no matter what happens, we know that proof of work and privacy are the solutions to the two biggest problems we see in society today. And that's really what's going to drive people towards Monero, I think. And on the other side of that, I always say, they could destroy Monero tomorrow if they wanted to. And all they have to do is basically give people freedom, and stop the fiat Ponzi. And that they can destroy Monero. There's absolutely no need for Monero in a world where people are not forced into Monero for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Great point, Stoic. I just wanted to add. I think you're absolutely right. I'm at the camp of privacy is a human right, and I think the way I see Monero, to add to your comments, is that it really is the checks and balance of an unfair system, right? It's almost it's the ethos of the original Bitcoin. You know, that's the only thing that's really allowing for this sort of checks and balance that's gone array over the last few years, right? The continuous amount of printing of money, the push towards centralized power, exercising things that the people may not agree with. And I think these are what these things represent in the very basics of it. I think it's admirable that people are at least paying attention. So thanks for that.
No, pleasure, man. Yeah, it is interesting. I suppose we'll see what happens in the future. But, I always think that the world is kind of human behavior, although people might think it's not sort of maths based, it is sort of maths based in a way. And that's the way that regulators sort of plan their laws as well. It's sort of an incentive based structure. So if you talk about like incentives and probabilities, if you put X rule in place, what's the probability that X result is going to happen, right? So there are certain things that you can tweak to, change the probability of human behavior. And I think that's really all we're going to see with Monero too, is just each event that happens along the way is going to change the probability of somebody moving towards Monero. And over a long enough period of time, that is going to become quite a tidal wave, I believe. One thing I do agree with the Bitcoin maximalist about is sort of like but maybe from a different point of view, is like a gradually then suddenly kind of thing. So if we had like a world that I think we're going to head into, or even a world that we saw in the past, like with COVID, for example, it really, I think at first people kind of put up with it for a little bit. So there's not going to be that real drive for people to overnight just drop everything and adopt something else, right? But given a long enough period of time and given other factors coming into play, that probability will gradually rise, and then all of a sudden it's going to become a tidal wave and then rise quite significantly anyway. That's sort of one of my theses about it anyway.
Hey, awesome. I've got probably a couple more questions, and then I'll swing it to the other dudes. But I think what you were talking about there, Stoic, around, I guess, the driving, I guess, ethos and principles of the individuals here, I think, obviously we'll probably hear for that similar reason. I think with regulators, right, they see the threat of what we're doing, of being involved in what we're doing. Is obviously there's a threat to the fiat Ponzi, like you're talking about, but there's always this perception around anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist, right? And that seems to be, quite a strong narrative around crypto. I'd imagine that's like even stronger in the privacy coin and Monero, I guess, realm. People would be criticizing it in that way. What is the sort of thoughts around that and within the community? I mean, obviously we're here for freedom, are there ways that is addressed by Monero that could actually overcome, I guess, that FUD?
I can only sort of give you my opinion on it. I personally don't think it really matters because, like I said before, decentralization and permissionlessness wins over regulation. It doesn't matter what the regulation has to say. I personally think it's just a cheap attack vector in an attempt to gain more power or more authority. It wouldn't even matter what happened. You would still have pieces of shit like Elizabeth Warren coming out and being this anti-crypto army, kind of, so to say. It really is. I mean, it's kind of funny, actually, because Bitcoin still actually gets a lot of that used for terrorist financing, used for, drug dealing kind of bullshit, even though really nobody uses Bitcoin anymore because it's, like I said before, people get their doors kicked down every day for using it. So I think, because there really are so many ways to look at it, right? Like you can look at it from a realistic point of view of trying to gain more adoption. And obviously the Zcash approach to that is that they made it optionally private, right? But obviously it has those problems that I spoke about before, where you're the bird shit on the black shoe when you're choosing to opt into privacy rather than not opt into privacy. It shows that you have something to hide. I think in the long run, the fiat Ponzi comes crashing down. I think in the long run, the people who are held up by the fiat Ponzi, whether that be people in politics, whether that be like globalist organizations, I think they all come crashing down in the long run. And I think one of the main tools behind that is going to be Monero, or is going to be that permissionless decentralized network. So I think in the long run, the most value is provided to people through having that alternative that doesn't actually comply and doesn't be a cuck to the state in an attempt to get more dollars in the short term, right? Like in an attempt to make number go up, so to say, by being able to be listed on more exchanges. So that's just my opinion anyway. I don't think it really matters. And I think that's the real power of it too.
My last question, is there smart contract technology involved with Monero, and is there an NFT ecosystem within the Monero community?
So no, there's no smart contracts ability. The whole sort of focus of Monero is to simply have one job, which is to be decentralized, to be private digital cash, or you can kind of say it just digital cash because it entails privacy. So no smart contracts ability. There is no plans. I would go so far as to say there would be fight back if somebody did try to introduce that. There was something called Mordinals, which is obviously like ordinals, but I believe because this was probably like a year and a half ago, I think, or maybe it was earlier this year. Maybe it was in like February this year or something like that. There was something that was just a consequence of having a similar code base to Bitcoin that made it able to do that. But I believe they made it so you couldn't do that. Don't ask me how they did it. I don't know whether they like forked away from it or whatever they did, or just updated the software or whatever it was. But no, you can't do either. It's really just focusing on being private digital cash. And I think that's actually a good thing if you ask me, because I think the only real use case, in my opinion, right? This is my opinion. The only real use case for a smart contract ability on Monero would be to have a stable coin that's backed by Monero, sort of like a MakerDAO situation where they have DAI stable coin backed by ETH. But obviously that's turned into a whole basket of Ponzi coins as well, which gives it some load of instability. For example, like it's backed by DAI now has a basket backed by USDC, which doesn't make any sense to start with. But obviously USDC is fully permissioned, and obviously we saw USDC go down to 90 cents on the dollar earlier this year, which presented a whole lot of problems for DAI as well. And that would mainly just be from a usability point of view, right? Like we see a real use case. I mean, the only reason people use Tron these days is to send dollars to each other, right? And Tron's otherwise a dead chain. So we see like there is a clear demand for having that stability in US dollars. And if it was backed by something like Monero, just for the sake of being able to technically do it, that would be the only use case, in my opinion, to have it on Monero that otherwise isn't being filled by the market. Because if you want smart contracts, like that's fine. Like I'm not saying anything wrong with that, but there's chains that do it significantly better than Monero. So there's no point adding. Like there's chains with faster block times, etc. than Monero. So there's no point adding smart contractability onto Monero when you're not actually solving a problem because other people are already doing it better than you. And the whole thing is too, like the whole development in the crypto space is really centered around smart contracts development in a way, whereas people and projects are always competing with each other to make that perfect trilemma. And they're certainly making progress on that. And I don't think Monero is one of those things that, one, you want to change. Two, it doesn't have that community that's always wanting to change. Although I would argue that it does actually have that to some extent, because even the Bitcoin maximalists criticize Monero about, making upgrades to the protocol. Pretty much on a yearly basis, Monero is making upgrades to the protocol. So there certainly is not that stagnant community like there is in Bitcoin, where it's preserve everything how it is as an artifact, don't change it whatsoever. But yeah, like for smart contracts, I don't think, personally, in my opinion, I don't think, well, I know for a fact it's not on Monero. And in my opinion, I don't think it should be on Monero.
Okay, man. Hey, thank you for answering that question. Yeah, very interesting about ordinals. I wonder if it was some sort of ability to inscribe. But it's very interesting because we had some ordinals people come and speak to us, and they were talking about how Bitcoin maxis, I guess, who don't really like NFTs, view it as graffiti on their blockchain, and which I found like an interesting concept. But I guess, yeah, like it sounds like that Monero found a way to prevent it, which is quite interesting. But what I'm going to do is I'll swing it to our other. Sorry, I think Ghost has dropped down. But Vince, if you've got any questions, and then we've been going for around about an hour, so I'll look to wrap up once Vince has got any last questions off.
Yeah, I think as I'm listening and I'm thinking privacy and being not necessarily for nefarious reasons, but to build some potential wealth within Monero and kind of keep it private from prying eyes, because anytime you go through a centralized exchange, they're gonna want you to be KYC'd, there's gonna be a kind of a trace, right? So, I mean, if somebody wanted to get completely into Monero, and stay invisible, so to speak, and build some, extra wealth in that and inside that ecosystem. How would you really onboard somebody and keep them completely anonymous without having to go through a centralized exchange? I'm not real familiar with Monero, and I haven't studied it, so I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around, like, how would I make that leap if I was going to do that, and stay
Yeah,
private?
sure. Yeah, sure. Like I said before, there is like always some element of being on a centralized exchange, i.e., a database where there's data that's going to be stored. The thing about using non KYC exchanges, so that's obviously what I would recommend is go through non KYC exchanges like MEXC or a non KYC or sorry, a exchange aggregator like Trocador. Is that they are crypto to crypto pairs only, so you can't put fiat through there. So well, you can, but it's obviously you'd have to KYC. So my suggestion would be buy something with cheap fees, like a Litecoin, like a Dogecoin, like a Matic, for example, and then use that. Send that to, obviously, depending on what option you go for, whether that's send that to your private wallet to send to a different exchange, whether that's to send to your private wallet to use on Trocador, whatever, and they'll give you an address to send to all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there, like I say, you have to take that thing that there always is going to be some element of data stored. Whether the data is personally identifying is a completely different question. But there is no like completely zero data way to basically stay completely fully private, i.e., they don't even log what time you did it, for example. That's just not going to happen. So yeah, crypto to crypto, non KYC exchange. That's the best way to do it. There is also other benefits too to once you're in Monero. So like even if they did, for example, so you go through a KYC exchange and they know exactly that you bought Monero, know how much you bought. They know, well, they think they know what you basically use the stealth address. So they think they know what address you sent it to. Once it's actually on the Monero network and obviously in your wallet, they don't know what you do with it, for example. So like you could send it to somebody, which is a capital gains, it's a taxable event. And I just want to put out there for the record, you should definitely not break the law. I kind of have to say that. Definitely don't break the law. Definitely don't evade tax. But I'm saying technically they don't know what is a capital gains taxable event after that. They don't know what you did with it. They don't know who you sent it to. So once it's on that Monero network, it does have that, degree of privacy, or I suppose you'd call it complete privacy afterwards. But yeah, sorry, just to answer the question once more, crypto to crypto, non KYC exchange is the best way to do it.
Brilliant, mate. Brilliant. Yeah, MEXC or MEXC. Yeah, it's definitely got that benefit. But hey, thank you very much for joining us, Stoic. I did hear that you have your own book, the Monero Standard. So maybe if you could just, give a little plug to your book and let us know about that book. So if people want to continue their education on Monero, they can grab it.
Yeah, so a bit of a shameless plug. And the reason it's shameless is because I actually believe that the book itself, I put a lot of effort into it, and it does actually provide a lot of value to people. I do really genuinely believe that. So for anyone interested in getting a copy of the Monero Standard, we basically talk about sort of some concepts we talked about today, which is we look at the two biggest problems in the world, which is, the fiat Ponzi, which is going to collapse, and the whole sort of anti-freedom global socialist agenda, the globalist movement. And we sort of look at the problems and then we try and find a solution. And we sort of frame up that, as we spoke about, proof of work and privacy is that solution, right? Naturally, I'm going over it at a very high level. There's a lot more detail. But the whole book actually, part of the reason why I think it provides so much value to people is because it's written from, so somebody who's not familiar with crypto at all, like the average layman, could pick up the book and understand it from the first page all the way to the last page and completely understand the whole point. There's no cryptography in it. You don't need to be, you don't even need to be in crypto. You don't need to be a cryptographer. You don't need to be a developer. I always say to my girlfriend that it's definitely one of two things, right? Like, this is either a really good book or I'm completely fucking delusional. Like, it's definitely one of the two, right? And the people who I've given the book to proofread, which has included my dad, who's completely disinterested in anything to do with crypto, have said it's a really good book. And I believe me, he wouldn't lie to me. So if anyone's interested in picking up a copy, it is currently available on the monerostandard.com. It's technically pre-orders, all right? But the book is, for the second time, to cut out. Remember, I said at the start, if I knew how hard it was when I started, I may not have started. So this has been getting this book to publish from the time I finished the book, like I just trying to get it printed, has been basically like a 6 to 8 month process at this point in time. So to give you like the TLDR, I have a copy of the Monero Standard, which some people listening in the audience have seen. The only problem with that book is that there was, like, the graphs, you could read them. For example, the M2 monetary supply graph, like, you could technically read it, but it just wasn't like perfect, if you know what I mean. So I figured I would just go back. I put so much effort into it, I may as well just make it perfect. So I've literally resubmitted the book to the publisher. They approved it yesterday, and there's now another copy on the way to my house, which should hopefully be here before the end of the week. So while it's technically still in pre-sale or pre-order, it will be shipped out, basically as soon as I get this new copy and approve that everything's all good. So I'm just trying to see the date. So, I mean, obviously I can't control post or whatever, but if I'm going to submit the orders next week, you would think that they would be there before Christmas, because that would give it a whole 2 weeks to turn up, which is a lot of time. So yeah, I mean, currently you can pay with basically proof of work coins and Ethereum on the website. There is no fiat currently, and that's by design. There will, however, because I'm using a book publisher called Ingram Spark, they do actually list it on all, well, I don't know about all bookshops, but certainly massive bookshops like Amazon, for example, like Barnes and Noble for you people who are in Australia, like Booktopia. There's a whole bunch of like book retailers, online bookstores that they all publish it on. So if you do want to pay in fiat, it's best to wait till next week or something like that and order yourself a copy then. But yeah, that's basically the TLDR. So if you're interested, go on monerostandard.com. And I guarantee you it's either a really good book or I'm delusional.
Love it, mate. I'm actually having a look at the website now, but yeah, congratulations, man. I think, many people have probably many people have that on their bucket list to, write a book. And so congratulations on getting it done, finished, man. I'm having a look at the website. Well done. That's great job. I will also get my shameless plug in as we wrap up. For those who aren't familiar, I lead the world's first and largest veteran NFT community. We're known as the Dogface Army. We have a number of sold out projects, and we're essentially an investor group that is very focused on what we've been talking here today, which is our own freedom and financial sovereignty. But we are also very focused on creating solutions for veterans through leveraging Web3 crypto NFTs. So we have our own mining farm. We're currently mining 5 crypto tokens, Bitcoin, Cardano, Litecoin, Doge, and Nervos. And this particular space has made me think that I need to go and speak to Aaron down there and see if we add Monero to our mining reserves. But yeah, we are fully doxed. We've got 26 people in our team. And we're well worth checking out. So give me a follow. Come on, and if you're interested in any of those things or causes, jump on through, have a look at our Discord website, etc. Reach out to me. I will literally get on a video call or Zoom call or VC with anybody. We are legit. We've got nothing to hide, and we're doing things really well. We're doing everything above board. So. But thanks, Stoic. Bro, I have really learned a lot, a huge amount. This is something that I've always been really interested in, and it's hard when you've got limited time in the day and you're building to I mean, I would love to, like I used to do back in, when I first got into crypto, just sit on YouTube and constantly learn. But to have someone like yourself who's written a book, obviously is committed to the technology, to come on and allow us to ask these very specific questions and get like cut through right to the source of the knowledge. It's really powerful, bro. And I really appreciate your time.
No, thanks so much for having me, man. I'm happy to come on anytime. I don't know if you guys have any podcasts or anyone in the audience has a podcast or wants to host spaces or whatever. I'm always happy to come on. Feel free to reach out. Anyone, send me a message if you have any questions. I'm a pretty open book myself, despite being a privacy advocate. I would just say one more thing before we wrap up. This space has got me keen for another space. So I might start up another space after this, and we can focus that on Monero privacy, just talk general shit. Because obviously I've met a few of you guys in real life who was in the audience. So yeah, the Dogface Army, the guys I know who I've met in real life, if you fit into neither of those categories, that's completely fine too. Yeah, come over to the next space and we'll kick on.
Beautiful, bro. Absolutely. Sorry, Vince, you were saying?
No, I just going to say thank you to Stoic for coming on and sharing this, and it's it's a nice refresher for me to hear more about Monero, and yeah, definitely thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming and sharing.
Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate your time as well. Thanks for the invitation.
All right, thank you, everybody. Give Stoic a follow, Vince and myself. And actually, hey, let's just all follow each other. We've probably all got the same sort of thinking. I have gone down through and tried to follow everybody, and I will follow up with that to anybody who follows me. It's great to be connected with like-minded people. It's very exciting, of course, everybody, where we are in the market at the moment. I think, those who are in the know, we all understand where we are relative to the halving. And I think most of us can feel that momentum starting to build, despite the best efforts from corrupt politicians and globalists to try and bring everything down. I truly believe that we're going to win this fight as long as we stick together and we continue to educate ourselves on important topics such as Monero, privacy coins, and proof of work, which is really the foundation. But thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. And yeah, jump on through to the next space. Stoic's going to kick one off. If you want to keep learning about this topic, yeah, bowl on over and let's jump into Stoic space.
Stay safe, guys.